Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to the fourth episode in our new webinar series, Oncology Hour. I'm Amanda Holman, and joining me this week is Fiona Evans, our lead patient advocate. We work for Massive Bio, a concierge clinical trial enrollment service where we connect patients to clinical trials. We're here to discuss cancer and answer any questions you want to know. We know there are always lots of questions surrounding clinical trials and clinical trial enrollment. So for this week, we'll be discussing how to enroll in clinical trials, and based on community input, we've created a Q&A. If you have any clinical trial questions that come up in the chat or come up during the event, please write them into the chat on Facebook, and we'll be sure to take some time to answer them at the end. Before we begin, Fiona, can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Hi, Amanda. Yes, I'm happy to. My name is Fiona Evans. I'm the lead patient advocate here at Massive Bio. I have been in this role for about 2 years. I'm passionate about cancer research and helping cancer patients, and I work closely with our cancer patients, my fellow patient advocates, and our case management team to help provide the best options available for all our patients.
Thanks, Fiona. We're so excited to have you here today.
Same. Thank you.
So to start us off, what are clinical trials?
So clinical trials are a type of research that studies new treatments and testing. They are going through the FDA approval process, and all FDA approved treatments that are available have been through this process in order to be approved.
So why should a patient enroll in a clinical trial?
So enrolling in a clinical trial gives patients access to new treatments which would otherwise not be available to them for probably years from now. It also helps with the cost of new treatments, and it helps advancing treatments for other patients going through the same diagnosis and issues.
So clinical trials are beneficial to you and cancer patients in the future?
Yes, absolutely.
One of the questions we've gotten a lot, and you mentioned that, they're all FDA approved already, but a lot of people want to know if, because it is a clinical trial, will they be treated like test subjects?
So, no, patients are not treated like test subjects. The clinical trial process helps approve treatments and testing for patients to use. It needs to be checked for safety. Patients are actually followed very closely during a clinical trial. I wouldn't say that they're treated like test subjects. The trial has an assigned doctor, nurses, support staff. They're available to assist and follow the patient throughout the process. It's just like going to your local doctor for treatment, but you're receiving a little bit extra TLC or follow-up care with the trial.
Along those lines, are clinical trials safe?
They are safe. There are very strict protocols in place for clinical trials, and patients are monitored, like I said, very closely. There's physicians, doctors, nurses, support staff available, and they do check up on patients, throughout the process and frequently to make sure that everything is going as planned.
That sounds reassuring.
Yeah.
I know a lot of patients wonder when they should enroll because or a common misconception is that you only look into clinical trials when you've tried everything else.
Right. That is definitely a common misconception. It used to be that clinical trials were used as a last resort, but patients can actually enroll into a clinical trial anytime during their cancer journey. There's been so many advances in medicine that it's possible to enroll into the trial as a first-line treatment. So some patients that are newly diagnosed have the opportunity to enroll into a clinical trial as their first-line treatment and maybe try a second-line treatment after that with something that's not a clinical trial. So really, any time during their cancer journey, a patient can enroll into a clinical trial, and we at Massive Bio recommend that patients look into all of their options, including clinical trials, when they are first diagnosed.
It makes sense to sort of know what all of your possible options are as early as possible to make the most informed decisions.
Right. Yeah.
Would you be able to talk about some of the other benefits of enrolling in a clinical trial?
So, clinical trials are for new treatments. They can offer patients treatment that otherwise wouldn't be available to them. Currently, there's lots of clinical trials going on for targeted therapies. So there's a possibility that a patient would be receiving a targeted therapy that, again, isn't available otherwise. Clinical trials can help with the cost of treatments. Clinical trials go through a patient's local insurance, but it can help with some of the costs of new treatments that are available. Like I said before, it does help other patients. The more patients that enroll into clinical trials, the more advanced our treatments are going to become. So it helps patients now and in the future during these, difficult times and diagnoses.
Before we move on, just for patients who might not be aware, can you just quickly explain what a targeted therapy is?
So a targeted therapy is a treatment that is specific to a certain type of cancer. So there are tests that can be done called next generation sequencing. And those tests are done to determine specific biomarkers or alterations of a patient's cancer type. And with that information, there may be treatments available that are targeted specifically to that alteration. And so, it's a better option for them in terms of treating their cancer.
So especially if patients have very specific cancer types, that's where clinical trials for these could be extra useful.
Yeah, it can be. If they have a specific alteration and, that treatment is not available outside of the clinical trial area, then yes, that's definitely a possibility.
So can you talk a bit about what the process of enrolling in a clinical trial is like?
Absolutely. So our service makes it quick and hassle-free to enroll into a trial. There is a very simple HIPAA form that patients would complete. Our patient advocates are available through our call center to take calls and assist patients in completing this form. Patients can also find it online on our mobile app. Once the form is completed, we will collect the patient's medical records. Our case managers take over from there. They use our artificial intelligence-based technology to sort through the thousands of clinical trials that are currently available to locate clinical trials that the patient is eligible for. And because our service is virtual, the patient doesn't need to go anywhere. They don't need to leave their house in order to get started with this process. Once our case managers have located clinical trials that the patients are eligible for, the patient can then decide on a specific trial. The case managers help the patients in the enrollment process, they also do an insurance verification, and they try to make the entire process as smooth as possible. In addition to that, we follow along once the patient is enrolled. If any changes come up or any information is needed, we assist the patients, throughout their journey.
You mentioned that you collect medical records for this. Would you be able to explain why we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of clinical trials, there's lots of criteria that has to be met in order for a patient to be eligible for any specific trial. And we collect the medical records so that we can determine, based on the patient's diagnosis, medical and treatment history, what trials they're eligible for. So when our case managers provide a list of trials to the patient, that list is for trials that the patient can enroll into as soon as possible. They've already been pre-screened, so we know that they are eligible for specific trials.
So it sounds like quick medical record collection really speeds up the entire process of getting matched with clinical trials.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a dedicated medical records team that collects medical records, and they do that pretty quickly. But most patients do have access to their medical records through a patient portal. I know at my doctor's office, they offer a patient portal where I can view and download my own records. So if a patient decided to do that, it would even speed up the process, even more.
It's great to know. Would you be able to, sort of a two-part question, but would you be able to talk a bit about, what Massive Bio actually does, and then why patients should use our services?
Sure. So Massive Bio is an oncology-based technology company that gives cancer patients access to cutting-edge treatments. The company was founded in 2014, and we use an artificial intelligence-based technology to match patients to clinical trials. We work directly with patients, and we also work with doctors to assist them in searching for clinical trials for their patients. And I tell patients they should use our service because it will provide them with all the options. Our patient advocates, our case managers support the patients throughout the entire journey from, the first time they reach out to us until, they're happily enrolled in their clinical trial. And we help with cutting out any issues that might pop up throughout their journey. If you've looked at, clinical trials at all, the process can be tedious in terms of finding a trial that you're eligible for and enrolling into that trial. So we try to cut out all of those issues for the patients, making it simple, hassle-free for them to know what their options are and enroll into that trial as soon as possible.
Along those lines, what are the different services that we offer?
So we offer two services. One is our clinical trial matching service that we've been talking about. It is a way for patients to locate and enroll into clinical trials. Patients don't have to travel until a trial is decided upon. We can work with the patient's doctor. We help with the enrollment process at the trial site, and we take care of all the behind the scenes things that need to be done. And then we also offer our virtual tumor board. This is a service that provides patients with a comprehensive analysis of their case. One of our National Cancer Institute designated physicians will review a patient's case, provide them with a list of treatment options available, along with a list of the treatments that they recommend, including the rationale for that, and they provide them with a list of the clinical trials that are available. They can speak with the doctor, they can explain, why they're recommending what they're recommending, and the patient can ask any questions they may have. So it is a great way for a patient to have another opinion on their case and to determine what treatments are available. We always recommend that patients, have as many people reviewing their case as possible, because the more people looking at it, the more options may be found.
Second and third opinions are always recommended.
Yep.
So I know you mentioned that for the actual trial matching, there are no travel that's required.
Right.
If you do enroll in a clinical trial, what are the travel requirements?
So for the clinical trials, for patients to get started and use our service, they don't have to go anywhere. They can do it from their couch. Once the patient decides on a specific trial, it depends where that trial is located. And the patient actually decides how far they would like us to search for trials. So when our nurses are doing their search, they're searching closest to the patient's home. So they start their search within a 25-mile radius of a patient's home, and then they spread out based on the results that are found. Some patients say, I can't travel more than, 25 miles, and that's fine. We'll do our best to find a trial within that range. Some people say, I can travel 100 miles, or, they'll say, I can go to 200 miles, and we can do our search, in those designated areas. And sometimes we'll find something super close. You might find a trial a few miles away from your home. So it's really, we try to accommodate the patient as best as possible. And we can also sometimes have the trial site open a site close to the patient if there is not one available. So if that's, something we can do, we will happily do that for the patient.
Great to know. It's definitely the concierge aspect of our concierge clinical trial services.
Right.
Would you be able to talk about how long the process typically takes?
So for the clinical trial matching, it takes about 5 days. That is, of course, dependent on how quickly we receive the medical records. And like I said, we do have a dedicated team that works on that. What we're seeing now is that, to speed that process up, patients are able to upload their medical records right from their doctor's patient portal to our massive bio patient portal, which helps speed up the process. And then for our virtual tumor board, it takes a little bit longer. It takes about 7 days. And again, this is dependent upon how quickly we receive those medical records. So if the patient has them available and they're able to upload them, then, it'll definitely speed things up.
And how long do the clinical trials themselves last?
So clinical trials can last, months to years. It really depends on the trial. So once our case managers do our matching service, they'll be able to share the details of, everything that's involved in the trial, including how long it's going to run for.
Makes sense. And one last question. Also, I want to remind anyone in the audience, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. If you have any questions after this ends, again, please pop them in the chat and we are happy to help you. If you are interested in enrolling in clinical trials, check out the links in the chat below and we can provide you with more information. So Fiona, as a final question, because this is the big one that everyone always wants to know, with good reason, what are the costs involved with participation in a clinical trial?
So there should not be any additional costs for participation into a clinical trial. The trial itself goes through a patient's local insurance, and our case managers will do the insurance verification prior to the patient even showing up to the trial site. They make sure that that trial site is participating with the patient's insurance and will, verify that ahead of time. I tell patients that, if they generally have a copay for testing or, for blood work, then to expect that copay to still have it during the trial. But that may not be the case either. That may be waived due to, participating in the clinical trial. So I would say there are not any surprise fees associated with clinical trials.
That's great to know. Definitely makes it open to more people to participate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Fiona, thank you so much for joining me today. This was very informational and useful, and we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it. And, I look forward to any patients that are interested in our service.
And once more, if you are interested, please reach out, and we're happy to speak with you more and provide you any more information. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.